Welcome to the Harneys Offshore Litigation Podcast. And today I'm delighted to be joined by my colleague, William Peake. William, you haven't put on the usual background music of the Caribbean Sea gently rolling in the background to show off this time round.
No, Ian, I haven't on this occasion, but I'd like to very much thank you for inviting me on today. It just goes to show that it's always worth continuing to scrape the bottom of the barrel, as I'm usually.
Not at all. Your continued rejections of our invitations have been noted, and being a contributor to the blog and writing, Will, it's very good to have you on here. And I mean, what we thought we'd talk about is the sort of background production work that goes into the blog, because it's been a tremendous success with subscriptions around the world, and it's really bonded Harneys litigators together who work on it non-stop, round the clock, and particularly creating scoops, as it were, because we are, as lawyers involved in some of these big cases that then the legal press want to report about. And it's been remarkable how they write to us and ask whether they can republish, reblog, or speak to one of us. Why do you think that is, Will? I mean, where has this come from? Where does the culture of this blog derive from?
Well, I think the wonderful thing about this blog, Ian, is that it gives the full Harneys global litigation team an opportunity to work together. We in a much more relaxed environment, as opposed to the stresses and complexities of the cross-border litigation that we are doing day in, day out. But the wonderful thing about the blog as well is that it gives junior lawyers in particular an excellent opportunity to hone their drafting skills and to write in a concise and clear fashion, and also to write with an element of to make it engaging, make it compelling, make it something that people genuinely want to read. I think there's a number of points that make the blog particularly appealing and worth reading. Is that it's not simply arid case studies. There is the QC corner, there's the 10 minutes with, where we give an opportunity for onshore and offshore leading figures to speak to us and for us to learn from them as much as anything. And there are case updates, there's filings, there's offshore litigation news and the like. And I think it works incredibly well. And it is really interesting that you say that. I mean, we are contacted by the media quite regularly about this. And why is that? It's because we are trying to get this content out, if it's urgent, as quickly as possible. I mean, to the extent that, I've stopped going through people's bins for exclusive first-hand experiences. But it is there's a healthy competition internally as well as to who actually has their finger on the pulse, who's actually getting this.
That's right. And actually, the people who do write these blogs, it's a real tribute to them, because it's not easy to draft in this style. I mean, if you look back in the history of the blog, we've never had a style which was hugely formalistic and legalistic. It's quite digestible to commercial people who aren't necessarily lawyers. And I always love the sort of little thing at the end that says, this is a 2-minute read. So when you click on it, you think, well, I can click on this in confidence. Just about the time the lift arrives on the ground floor, I will have finished that blog, which is a great comfort to people who, are inundated with information anyway. And it's quite hard to write in a style where the complex can be conveyed so simply, and there's real beauty in some of the drafting, I have to say.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the most frustrating elements, though, of actually reviewing these blogs is when one of our talented junior lawyers puts together a blog. And for example, I was doing one for one of our Mann article clerks during the summer, and I could, as per usual, add no value whatsoever to the drafting. And sure, but I had to make some attempt, give the impression that I actually had reviewed it and tried to mark it up. I made one suggested edit, to which the article clerk said, "No, I think you're wrong on that, William, because that changes the nuance of the point I was trying to make." With that, it was approved and sent out the door and received.
Listen, I've had similar insecurities.
I think insecurity is to be welcomed and encouraged throughout.
And actually, it sounds a flippant point, but one point that's vexed us recently is this: how one describes the use of provisional liquidations in in Cayman, for example, for restructuring purposes, because the case law describes it both as either variously, I should say, as light touch or soft touch, and very respected judges from around the world in many jurisdictions will use both expressions. I have to say I've taken a real dislike to the idea of soft touch, because in common parlance, soft touch means a pushover, whereas light touch just means skillfully and artfully addressing something. So soft touch to me just seems to send the wrong message, but no one else seems to agree with me on this. It's formed quite a point of contention amongst the authors.
I agree with you, Ian, but I think that's because I'm obsequious sycophant. But no, I do, because I think that that goes actually very neatly with your point about who is actually reading this. What is your takeaway if you see the phrase soft touch? I think it could be interpreted negatively in terms of, is that jurisdiction a soft touch jurisdiction? And I think it is just the common parlance point. For example, the Sunchung case, which dealt with a Hong Kong winding up petition which had been served. Then there was the light touch restructuring application in Cayman, which was successful. The Chief Justice, in 33 pages, the summary at the top refers to soft touch. And as you say, you've got hugely esteemed members of the judiciary using this. And I think that, for example, is an attempt by us in a soft power move to try and use light touch repeatedly and introduce that as an important concept.
It goes even further than that, because the style very much from the beginning has been, to remain credible so that people want to read this stuff, is to ensure that we are not merely an infomercial for offshore litigation. And we don't endorse every single decision. We don't endorse every piece of legislation and say this is the most brilliant legislation the world has ever seen. If it's our job to critique things intelligently and say when we think things have gone wrong, or whether we think on appeal actually that will be changed, and in a very polite and courteous way, we do express those views in the hopes that it gives value to the community and spurs debate. I mean, people won't thank us for being a glorified advertisement, really.
And I think as well, the blog, certainly the evolution of the blog, I think shows the maturity as well of our litigation team, actually, because I think when the blog commenced, we covered cases that only involved Harneys. And we could see quite quickly that, what does that achieve? It adds nothing to the greater debates in terms of what the issues are. And so that's been good to see. And also, due to the alacrity of jurisdictions like Cayman, like BVI, to follow leading common law cases in England and other Commonwealth authorities, we cover those cases as well. We, of course, flag where appropriate that, of course, we don't practice English law, but those cases will be hugely persuasive in the courts where we do practice. And that also allows us to engage really thoroughly and comprehensively with onshore lawyers who are grappling with these issues on a day-to-day basis. And actually, the flip side of that, for example, on the SAD litigation, which I think this is possibly the longest I've gone without mentioning the SAD litigation, so I deserve some sort of an award for that. That deals heavily with the illegality doctrine. That has been covered extensively in England recently. There's a recent Supreme Court judgment, Stoffel, on that point. And it's been fascinating for me because, based in London, spending a huge amount of time in Cayman, that those onshore lawyers want to discuss illegality with me. And they say, look, we know you poured over this issue. So you're looking at it through both ends of the telescope, and that's a really nice place to be.
Well, it's obviously my fault, Will, for not raising the SAR litigation earlier, so you could talk about it some more.
No, I mean, I think there is a global collective eye roll from all of the Harneys litigators.
That's certainly not true.
They would have thought that I was feeling a little bit off color if I hadn't have mentioned it. So it's good to get it in.
Well, a great piece of litigation, extremely long running and fascinating. interesting because it's really developed, jurisprudence. And, the reality of all of our litigation is that we are working with teams of lawyers and accountants and valuers from around the world. And that requires a team approach. And if you can share that, the knowledge of how cases develop offshore with them and vice versa, that just builds those relationships. It really is a sort of escutcheon for our culture, and so important to protect, the quality of it from sharing and being, mature about what we cover and how we cover it is a real lasting legacy.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. There's a fascinating article. It's just been released by Edmund King, QC at Essex Court Chambers, where he takes a trot through all of the points that can cause you to lose litigation, and quite a few of them resonated with me, given my checkered past. But there's an excellent point in relation to having a small, nimble team will always defeat a complex, huge ranging team whereby people can't communicate. And the blog is actually a brilliant example of how Harneys approaches its litigation cases, because it's small, nimble teams communicating properly with each other. And that's how we are efficient, and that's how we get something relevant out so quickly.
Yeah, I'm so glad you mentioned Edmund King QC's article. It's so witty and funny and so well crafted. But, that cooperation between teams isn't easy. And I've always said it's the hardest part of the job, living in Asia, but litigating with my colleagues offshore. And we don't always get it right. And in the early years, it was really tough because we didn't have litigators out here in Asia, in Hong Kong, for example, and finding the right people, finding the right tone, ensuring that everyone's involved and up to speed and communicating well with each other, respecting each other. That is years worth of effort. Once you get it in place, though, and you understand that the mechanisms to achieve that, and new joiners, of course, have to be constantly schooled in that culture, it is a fabulously strong and durable system. But gosh, it takes a lot of work and experience to understand how best to deliver it, actually.
Yeah, and you cannot take for granted each day that you wake up that it'll work. It'll have to be constant communication. And one of the real challenges that COVID has presented is the remote working space. Previously, if you wanted to, deal with an issue, you just pop next door to your colleague and you said, I'm sorry, I'm odd, I have an issue. When you say we furnish, it should be we provide. And without
it's these weighty points, Will, that you're so famous for,
without starting World War III. But whereas now in the remote world, suddenly having those conversations is difficult, and they become a great point. They become flashpoints when they absolutely shouldn't be. I'm really pleased with how Harneys has managed to survive and prosper in that orbit of a remote world. And that is because we actually speak to each other day in, day out. We've actually built lasting bonds between us as a network, and that's worked really well.
And oddly enough, the times that I've been working from home and people can see my sort of, my daughter in the background screaming, or the the chaos of home,
it's just nice to have somebody talking sense too.
That's right. Let me hand over. In those circumstances, actually, it builds something more personal, and people realize, this is just more than simply a colleague. This is another human being with all the same, highs and lows that I have in a day, and the same late night calls that I have to do. And that's been bonding, actually, and the discussions of COVID and how we're all affected differently, but certainly affected, has in an odd way brought us closer together, even though we can't travel to see each other.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting, that point about people seeing the background of where you're working, because it introduces a vulnerability and an honesty which really reinforces why you want to go the extra mile for your colleague. And that's what really locks and calcifies those bonds.
Yeah.
Ian, it's been absolutely wonderful to have an opportunity to have a truly rambling but interesting conversation with you. You didn't correct my English once, so thank you. And we could deal with those points offline. Thanks very much. Yes, I really appreciate it.
I really enjoyed the weighty case law that you promised me, Will, but it's been the most enjoyable podcast I have done. So thank you very much, and stay safe out there. I'll date this in the times of COVID. Hope that you'll join me for another podcast soon. William and I refer to Mr. Edmund King QC during this podcast. The podcast was recorded prior to the very sad passing of Edmund over the Christmas period. Harneys was deeply saddened by this news and sends its sincerest condolences to his family and friends. May he rest in peace.